Welcome to T.S.O.B with Dr. G, a podcast featuring intellectual table talk about race and sexuality. I'm your host, Dr. Tracy Q. Gilbert, a sexuality educator, writer, and researcher. Join me as I talk with the most brilliant minds in human sexuality, applying a professional Black lens to discussions about sexiness, health, and healing in the new millennium. It's T.S.O.B, the sex ed of Black folk. Let's get to the get down, shall we? All right, y'all. So, hey. Welcome again to another episode of TSOB with me, Dr. G, aka the sex ed of Black folk. And I am here with another one of my amazing friends and colleagues in this work. One of my favorite people that I'm super excited that I finally got a chance to talk to this season. I'm talking about none other than Nefertari Sloan. We have already started having an amazing conversation, so we're going to kind of jump into that as much as we can. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and read Sloan's bio, and then we'll go from there. So, Sloan is a non-binary sex educator who has been facilitating classroom conversations about sexuality since 2016. They have facilitated over 800 LGBTQ inclusive workshops for youth aged 13 through 24, and their writing has appeared in Scarleteen, Racebaitr, and Upspoken, as well as a Cosmo docuseries on the need for LGBTQ inclusive sex education. They consider themselves a spiritual being having a physical experience and is intentional about incorporating a holistic lens in the work that they do. Their hobbies include offering hugs, which I've had the benefit of receiving before, and they're amazing, giving compliments, and dancing in grocery aisles, which is also phenomenal, and I recommend that as well as a self-care activity. So with that, I am going to go ahead and invite Nefertari Sloan to the show. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. So excited. Yes. Let's get this popping.
Let's do it. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to start off with the main questions that I have for all of my guests. So I'm going to start the questions. It's a three-parter. 1, where are you from? 2, where your people are from? And 3, what's got you thinking about sex and sexuality these days?
Okay, great. Awesome questions. Where do I even start? So I was born in Atlanta, the Mecca. So, okay. It's a good time there. But I ended up leaving at a young age because my mom passed away from breast cancer around age 4. So I was raised in Philadelphia. So 215 is in a building. That's where I rep on the East Coast. But I recently just moved to the West Coast and currently live in Oakland, California. So getting a little bit of spice from everywhere and excited to soak up some of the roots that they have here and learn and explore and get to know the area a little bit more. My ancestors, I wish I knew more about, but because of the lineage that was cut off from me, I'm doing a lot more work around, just getting to know my immediate relatives and learning a lot about their history because I was a formerly fostered youth. And what's excited me about sex and sexuality these days, it's hard to be honest about the reality that we're in with the pandemic and also acknowledge that sex and sexuality and the passion that comes from the freedom of liberation in sex and sexuality as a dual existence in today's situation. So I'm gonna say, for me, I love encouraging young people. I love encouraging autonomy, and I love agency, and I love the idea that people get to decide what sex looks like for them. I don't like the idea that sex for the longest time has been about, preventing STIs and stigmatizing, everybody's background and making sure that, particular groups of people are not reproducing, or particular groups of people are not given access to educational resources. So for me, just ensuring that the adequate the adequate audiences are being served. The reason why I got into this work was because I wanted to teach Black history, and I had never been in a classroom before, and I thought that it would be a really cool way to just get my foot in the door with teaching. And I fell in love with the work. I learned that like outside of Black history, there's just a wealth of information that's being hidden from us intentionally. So making sure that the lies are unfolded and the lessons that need to be unlearned are being unlearned. So like I'm hitting this from a ninja point of view. I'm a sneaky advocate, and I'm the type of person that's like, all right, like sex is great, you know, tantra's good, you know, like there's parts of it that we're gonna get to, but before we get to it, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen.
We need to unlearn. Absolutely.
So like let's speak the truth. Let's speak the truth, and then we can get to liberation.
Yes, I love that so much. I love it. And I did not know that you came through history. And I'm like, so I'm sure that's real deep when you're like, so let's talk about history and sex ed. Let's talk
about how this started. Let's talk about where this came from. You know what I mean?
Let's do that.
Origin stories. Origin stories.
Yes, I love that so much. And I love so one of the reasons all the other things that I love about you, one of the reasons I was absolutely like I really wanted you to come on the show was just the viewpoint that you bring to the table regarding the queering of sex ed, right? Thinking about the ways that you center not just Black folks, but like Black, queer, LGBTQ community in the work. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you came to that understanding about the need to do differently in that regard versus how we traditionally do sex ed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that it's important for me to note that like I'm the type of person who has been socialized as a Black girl. I grew up not knowing my identity as a non-binary person because that option had not been displayed for me in the classroom. And I think that it would have been so impactful, but I also think that timing is divine and things happen when they're supposed to, and like our identities can come to us in layers, and for people that come out late in life, like there's still hope for us, and there's still you know plenty of time and space for you to explore your identity without it needing to look like everybody else's coming out story. I didn't feel like I was hiding myself or my identity from any of my loved ones. I didn't feel like it was a process that was as challenging as it is for many LGBTQ youth who are in the foster care system, which, you know, we can talk about as well, because the rejection that they face and the microaggressions that happen and the stress and suicidality rates are through the roof. So I think that it's important for us to recognize like this is a public health issue, while also recognizing that for me, I became the lesson through teaching sexuality classes. Like I came to learn myself. I came to get to know myself by affirming what other young people were showing me. You know what I mean? Like I got to know that I was non-binary by celebrating our first, you know, coming out week. I got to practice drag by being an ally and loving on gay men and knowing that, you know, people who are out and proud and themselves in this authentic, hard, dishonest, like harmful world, you know, are doing their thing. And I can't help but have respect for that. So for me, I was inspired so much by all of the people that were around me. While I had my little boyfriend, like my friends thought that I was like in the closet, and I was like, nah, y'all cool. But I ended up falling in love with my first girlfriend, and didn't even admit at that point that I was a lesbian, because I was like, no, this is just one person who I happen to be into. You know what I mean? Like it is what it is, and that's because I'm personally attracted to a very specific type of person. So it is what it is. You know, we're all endowed our types.
Yes.
And for me, bringing that into the classroom, I felt was so important, because that's not something that I think is talked about enough. I think a lot of people think that like being LGBTQ has to look a particular way. And I think that something that I like to affirm is these labels versus identities only mean what we allow them to mean. We define them for ourselves. I think we put the I in identity, and we don't have to take on labels that are not meant for us. I think that it's very important that people who try and ascribe a particular kind of people who try and ascribe a particular type of behavior to an identity still have some sussing out to do when it comes to understanding the intersections between assigned sex at birth, gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And that's what people like me and you are here for. You know what I mean? To be compassionate, to be patient, to say, okay, like I hear you and I see you, but this is a human being. And like saying like, oh, like this is what this means, only really reveals a little bit more of the growth points and the growth areas that we might have. I be having these Twitter finger conversations with people on Facebook and these lesbian groups all the time. Because you wouldn't believe, like, everybody is still quite confused. And there's a lot of confusion. And I think that the more that conversation happens about it, and the less that we generalize, and the less that we put binary language on things, the more acceptance and proud conversations can happen. You know what I mean?
Yes. No, I'm hearing everything that you're saying, and it's got me thinking about so much. Before we move on, I definitely want to, well, not before we move on, after my next question, I definitely want to make sure that we take some time to break down for the folks who are not aware some of the terms that you've mentioned, some of the terms related to identity that they may be like, wait, sex what? Like those sorts of things. But I'm reminded as you speak about the difference even between labels and identity, and how identity is really, I love what you said about the I in identity. We put the I in identity because it reminds me of a quote that I say often from someone who was in my dissertation research, who talked about it being, they said, I think it's a tool of white supremacy to put a label on everything and to like basically essentializing it and making it be that, oh, well, if you have this label, that means you do these things, and making it very prescriptive.
It's a diagnosis.
And so when you said that, I think very much, even now, like, I feel like what's different to me about what you're talking about is that instead of what I feel like is the common discourse in sex ed, that's like, we are going to teach about sexual orientation and gender identity, which means I'm going to give you a bunch of terms, and then when you can tell me that you can recite them and define them, then you have somehow mastered this concept.
We don't do that here. We don't do that here. We say, if you pick one, you can pick one if you want, but it really doesn't mean anything. Just so you know.
Yeah, and that's very different than queering the experience of learning about sexuality and sexual health and what that means. And so that's what's coming up for me. With that. So yes, though, let's break, because you broke down a lot. You said a lot of different terms for the folks who might not understand. So breaking down like the difference, like you said, between sex assigned at birth, your gender identity, your sex, et cetera, et cetera. Can you break those down for the folks at home who may not understand that?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So, assigned sex at birth, I define, and like I said, this is my definition. I'm not here to speak for every queer person who exists on the planet. We are not a monolith, just like every Black person does not speak for the entire race.
Facts.
Every sex educator does not speak for every sexuality educator. I've had many conversations with folks about, just people who are in this work, and there are so many different facets of it. I think it's so important for us to just be mindful of how much weight that we put on anything. So for me, assigned sex at birth has to do with the genitalia that you are born with, and that a doctor sees when a baby is born, what comes out, whether it's a clitoris or whether it is a penis. And I'm specific about clitoris and penis because the clitoris and the penis are homologous organs, which means that they're essentially the same, like nipples. Everybody has nipples. Maybe they do different functions, but on our bodies, we can recognize that they're similar. So the clitoris and the penis are homologous organs. Whether a doctor identifies them based on what size it is, he will say male or female. The issue with doing that is there are multiple biological factors that can be incorporated in someone's body that can also be categorized as male or female. This also can include chromosomes. This can include your hormones. This can include your internal reproductive organs. And something that I'd love to add, and I appreciate having this platform for, is that we have a name for the term that we use to refer to the outside of a female conglomeration, the vulva, but we don't have a term for the male one. So I tried to come up with a term, and I submitted it to dictionary.com. They rejected it, of course, because, they racist. I don't have time, but, I'm going to get my receipts.
But it ain't nothing for us to get something moved. You know how black folks make language move. Look, we can go ahead right now and call it whatever we want to call it.
Precisely.
So what's the new term?
The new term is vita, okay? So vita, and I did my work. I did some etymology behind it. Vita, the root term, means life. I'm trying to give it some verve. Yes. But, when we think about the taint, when we think about the scrotum, these things are also homologous with the labia. These things can also be comparative to the vulva. And I think the more that we take away attention from the penis, the less the patriarchy will be able to just whip it around and make it seem like it's that big of a deal. So, this is all based on genitalia, that one factor. And then that one factor is determining how you spend the rest of your life, what sports teams you're allowed to be on, what bathrooms you're allowed to go in, what color they use at your gender reveal party, which is also bullshit. Like, we don't need to be assigning colors to people based on what we're assuming their genitals look like. We don't need to be telling people what our children's genitals look like. For real. So I think it's very important for us to just be mindful about the messages that we're sending when we put so much emphasis on this kind of culture. And it's not anybody's fault. I read a book called The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter, an amazing historian, Black woman, who talked about how culture is defined by what we have been trained to look for. And doctors are being trained to look for this thing. What would happen if we were just looking for something else? What would happen if we allowed people to identify for themselves at a certain age? We've got cultures that decide, you reach a certain age, there's rites of passages, there's times where people can choose their names, there's times where people can choose their boxes, their genders, you can do that anyway. I'm a proponent that says, like, whenever you're ready, whenever you can speak for yourself, like, then please do. But the fact that, like, so much is done around that at such an early age can be harmful, and also erases intersex populations and intersex communities. So for people who are not familiar with that term, what might be familiar is the term hermaphrodite that is no longer socially acceptable. And I would say outdated, just for the sake of being respectful to folks. The term that has been approved is intersex, and that could refer to someone who has a combination or conglomeration of parts that... I don't want to say both, because that also insinuates that, like, it would be out of the ordinary for someone to have their natural body be different. Like, you can just be born in a way that is different from what is considered mainstream. So, like, intersex folks exist. Their existence is normal in the same way that everyone else's existence is normal.
Absolutely.
So I think that it's important for us to recognize we're not saying, oh, like, you've got male and female, or you're this and that. There are people who might have inner reproductive organs that we recognize as female and outer reproductive organs that we recognize as male. There are people who have chromosome differences that, just are not being acknowledged. And there are surgeries that are happening to these babies without their consent, to the extent that it is traumatizing them because their parents are not letting them know what is going on with them at these ages. and then we don't find out until something happens later on in life. So I think it's very important for everyone to recognize when it comes to assigned sex at birth, it's complicated, it's complex, it needs to stop happening. Like even the idea that we call it sex assigned at birth or biological sex, like that is invalidating the person. Like when you say, oh, like you're actually female or you're actually male, like you're telling
or biologically male, biologically female.
Right. You're telling that person like, oh, like they how they see themselves internally doesn't matter, and how their sense of self is, which is ultimately what is more important, is invalidated because of what somebody else said based off of one factor, like I said, that people still don't understand. So there's a lot of there's a lot of work to be done around it.
Yes, absolutely. In my head, I was like, you better preach this thing, because you were coming through with the facts on that. Absolutely. And what I often, when I'm teaching about intersex, I often raise up the concept of, or the idea of ambiguity, right? And really, in my mind, I appreciate the ways intersex queers even the concept of sex, and like the idea of like even your literal genitals are they are what they are. They have no set definition. They have no set defined look. They just are what they are. And I think that brings in even more freedom. Like you said, it's like, why are we even looking at genitals in the first place? Let's make sure that there's a heartbeat. Let's make sure that the lungs work. And that is really the only priority that we actually need to have in terms of determining a healthy baby, right? So
to decide how much power we want to give the baby.
Exactly. Right. So I love that. And so you actually have me thinking of kind of a professional question. So I think of people who, swear to get it around sexual and gender diversity. And they're like, yeah, we recognize we need to be being more inclusive in our classrooms. But when it comes to this topic, they're still kind of thinking about male and female and a lot of the rhetoric is that, well, it's just too complicated to get people to understand the ambiguity and to get people to understand the queerness of this. And so I'd love you to speak on how you've been able to successfully bring this into the classroom and help people at all ages understand like, oh, this is not just male and female. It's not just one end or the other.
Absolutely. So I think that for me, like what I do is I come back to language and how important it is to be distinct when you're talking about language. So when I use terms like male and female, I am referring to biology. I am referring to a particular set of gonads. I am referring to, the types of chromosomes that are associated with a particular set. When I use boy or girl, I'm talking about gender identity. Gender identity is an internal sense of self. When I use masculine or feminine, I'm talking about gender expression. When I use particular sexualities like bisexual, I'm just trying to give the bis some I'm like, give the bisexual people give them the floor. But when I use lesbian, gay, bisexual, these are terms that we're using for sexual orientation. So I try and separate based on the categories that we're talking about, because I don't think that it's productive to use certain words interchangeably. Like I hear a lot of folks do the correction when they're like, we shouldn't refer to women or girls as females. You know what I mean? Female is a term that can apply to any particular
species.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. So like female is a term that can refer to any particular species, but when we're talking about identities and ways to humanize, we want to refer to someone as a woman or a boy. I also think that it's very important to make the distinction. If you're talking about someone who's trans and you want to be inclusive of someone who's trans, don't say, a trans woman and a regular woman, or a trans person and or even say trans women and women. You need to, if you're going to say trans women, say cis women. If you're going to say if you're going to say the particular defining factor before someone's gender identity in a particular way, just be mindful of like what you're communicating by also not modifying that dominant group. So just ensuring that we're not othering the group that might be
Yes.
new to you. And being for me, like being inclusive like feels like not pushing that group out in the first place. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting conversation to be having because it's more about acknowledging the existence of someone who's been in the room the entire time and like
Absolutely.
has for so long just felt like they have been left out. So like for me offering these options and saying, hey, like this is what exists here, or let's knock this particular group down a little bit, or say like, okay, like it's fine to be heterosexual, like if that's what you like, if that's what you into, but like recognize that you got some other options. Like you don't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
yourself in a box if you don't want to. Like
Yeah.
a lot of us are
Right.
being boxed in so oppressively and don't even realize how oppressive that box is. So I think that it's just really important for young people, especially because that early age is so developmental, that they are given permission to grow and water their own soil in that way.
Yes. I love that. Yes. Water it. Yes. And definitely being able to understand themselves as they see themselves and not as, oh, well, this is what I was told I am. And so I have to
Mm-hmm.
own this because this is the only way that I'm going to be accepted and all of that. So absolutely everything you're saying, I'm right there with you. There's a few more questions I think I want to ask about the ways we talked about intersectionality before we started this conversation, and I want to at some point bring in the ways that intersectionality affects the ways in which we may specifically talk about the experiences of trans women, or specifically talk about the experiences of Black women, or so on and so forth. But before we get to that, I want to bring it back more to intraculturally and thinking about the experiences of Black folks and thinking about the Black community. So if you could if you felt like there was one thing that you think represents a learning opportunity, or kind of like a place where maybe we could stand to do a little bit better around these particular topics in the Black community, what would you say it is?
You know, it's very difficult for me to say because I I don't wish to label, like we already said, the labeling, the white, it's white supremacist, it's that lens. But
Mm-hmm.
some of my most challenging classes that I have had this conversation in have been with Black girls. And
Mm.
for me, being with, and like as someone, like I said, who is socialized that way, and who appreciates Black femmes and sees the power that we have to know that so much of that homophobia has been internalized and
Mm-hmm.
perpetuated, um, only says so much about how much has permeated our communities and
Mm-hmm.
forces us not to allow our men to express themselves in healthy
Mm-hmm.
ways, which I guess shows up in a lot of it shows up in layers. It shows up in layers, but a number of times that I've gone to have the gender and sexuality conversation with at-risk youth who are primarily Black girls, they have rejected this idea. I have been guilty of this. I have been one of the girls who says like, oh, like I'm strictly dickly, like
Mm-hmm.
one of the girls who says like, if my son were gay, I wouldn't accept him, or if this, were the particular, or if I got approached by someone, this is how I would react. And I think that it's really disheartening because we know where those messages come from. And I wish that there was a way that we could stop them from being perpetuated. I think
Yeah.
that queer people are magic. Queer people have done so much to push us forward
Agreed.
as a
Agreed.
culture. They have done so much to save us in our civil rights movements. They have done
Yeah.
so much to protect and uplift young people. And I think that it's really, really sad when we don't value what they have to offer us as a community, and when their humanity is denied so vehemently. And I think that for me, like, one of the biggest passions that I have is making sure that community is being acknowledged by name, given their flowers while they're still alive, while they're still here with us, because they're being, trans women specifically, Black trans women being murdered at rates that are abhorrent. You know what I mean? I think that it's just so important for us to make sure that they're seen as people. Like, I think people don't see Black people as people. And the issue of intersectionality goes, like, the further, quote unquote, further down on the rung you are of those identities, the less human you are. And, like, it's the easier it is to eliminate you. The easier it is to incite genocide.
And you know what? I'm curious where you feel like that comes from, and not necessarily the ideology, because we know where that comes from, but I mean in terms of the willingness to clutch so strongly to ideas that are clearly so toxic and so harmful and so self-limiting, right? I think about the ways that homophobia and transphobia limits even cis hetero Black women from being able to fully lean into their own power, into their own self-acceptance. Like I think of how much I have gained and learned, and how much my life has benefited from leaning into the scholarship of Black trans women and the thought and the ideas. And I'm just like, I feel more in touch with my femininity because of Black trans women. And I think about like what is it, do you think it is that makes cis Black women want to hold on so tightly?
Shame, embarrassment. I think it's a touch of envy. I think for me, I think what I see when I see queer people is people who don't care what larger society thinks. They don't care about rejecting what was illegal. Like these are systemic things that have been imposed. And I think that, like, people think that it was a long time ago that, like, sodomy was like the type of thing that got you thrown into jail. So, like, if we're just talking about being gay, just being gay, it was not okay. Like, you had to hide. Even queer people, queer relationships, lesbian relationships, butch femme relationships were in that form because people had to pretend that they were still men and women. I think that even now there's some research that I've done on, like, stud for stud relationships, because I am attracted to masculine identified and masculine presenting women. I think that even in that particular realm, finding people who are comfortable displaying what presents as homosexual is still not seen and accepted as okay. And I think that there are so many layers. I think with the AIDS epidemic and with, the way that DL men affected, or
the assumption thereof.
Yeah, right.
Know that had to get debunked as
absolutely,
well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, like, but these are the myths. These are the myths that get perpetuated, and then these are the myths that get passed down. So I think that, like, for cis women who have not been given permission to access their power, who have not been given permission to access their joy, who have not been given permission to access pleasure and be happy and be proud without feeling like they're getting slut shamed, without feeling like they're getting called a hoe, without feeling like without feeling like they're getting called a hoe with a negative connotation, mind you, because I also think that that's something that we need to debunk and reclaim and be.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast episode.
It's too much. It's too much.
But it's real. You're right. It's real. It is real. It is real.
And it's like queer people are saying, like, oh, you want to call me that? I'ma just call me that and do my thing.
Right.
I don't
And
have
then we'll
time.
just, bust the bubble. Absolutely.
I don't have time.
And it's so funny to me because I think of, very often I pull on E. Patrick Johnson's work, Performative Blackness, and he talks about and his queer theory, right? So this is the Southern Black take on queer theory. And he essentially posits that Black people were the first queer folks, like as a community, as a whole. And so I think about that notion of absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the idea of like, okay, once you get acceptance, then you want to try to see, block the way for other people to be accepted and to be seen as human. And I think some of that seems to come into play here, where it's like, okay, I've been able to, in my Black cis femininity, be accepted and be considered as quote unquote normal, and because I'm hanging on to it by a thread, then I'm going to push you aside, queer person or trans person or so and so, because you're gonna make me look bad, and then my thing will be threatened. When it's like, if we could all just lean into our queerness, we could in fact be free from all of these structures that we're trying to compete for, and all of this social power that has never been meant for any of us.
Yes.
And so that's what I'm sitting with as you're talking. And like I said, when the more I've leaned into my own queerness and my own understanding of the fluidity that has been my birthright as an African person, I feel like that has set me up to be like I'm good. Like, what? I don't need none of this. I don't need to fight. No, I don't need to compare myself to anyone. I don't need to see myself as better or worse. I am in fact being able to see us all as family, and being able to see us all, the humanity that exists inside of all of us. So maybe that's just the soapbox moment I'm having based on what you're saying. But I feel like that's the big piece that often gets, I'm like, why are you hanging on to this so much? What is it?
I was having a conversation with someone, and I'm not going to presume their identity, but I know that she dates cis men primarily. And we were talking about the infallibility of desirability politics, and how she kind of had just rejected so much of that because she recognized that like larger society didn't give a fuck about it, like regardless, because of her identity as a Black woman. She was saying like, y'all are not valuing me either way. So why not just be free? Why am I playing this game? Like, I don't have time. And like, I hadn't been looking at it that way, because one of my coping mechanisms and one of my coping skills has been to play into that desirability whenever I feel low, whenever I am, whenever I am in need of a boost, whenever I am in need of my own type of self-care, what I do is I play into that, knowing the reactions that I'm going to get, knowing that like, oh, like this is what y'all think is sexy today. Yeah. This is what I'm going to do.
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I've listened to your podcast, so I know you was going to ask about superpowers, and like that's what I consider to be one of my powers. Like,
that is literally the next question. So let's go right on into it. Let's go.
We are here. So I was going to say my adaptability. I grew up in the foster care system. I moved around a lot. I was used to being in different environments and trying to work the system to get my way. And I noticed how people react to my presence. You know what I mean? So like, depending on how I want the reaction to be will determine how I show up in the space. And after, a breakup or two, or something that might make my ego get a little low, what I will do is, present myself in a way that I think is going to get
hyper attractive.
I don't even want to say hyper attractive, because when I dress masculine, I feel powerful. Like when I dress masculine, I feel like I'm getting respect. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like people get out of my way, and like I don't, and it's just, it's a completely different dynamic. So like, I think that masculinity is attractive. Like that's
what I was going to say. Isn't that at its own level of attractiveness.
Yeah.
For the folks who don't know Sloan, let's just acknowledge that Sloan is fine. Like Sloan, no matter how Sloan dresses, Sloan is fine.
Thank you.
And so it is either going to give you mask attractiveness or femme attractiveness. Either way, Sloan can pull it off.
I receive that. I receive that, but like I'm a chameleonaire. So, people catch me riding dirty. So
yes. Yes.
But yeah, so in the sexuality field, I think that it's really cool because I get to be a different teacher. I get to show up as like, a different person every week for my kids, and they get to see like, oh, you get like, who is this today? Who's going to show up? And it's fun. It's fun to play with expression. It's fun to show, young people like the range of ways that they can show up, and also just be a model, a role model.
Yeah. And what I appreciate about that too is your ability to see it. And so you can be more agentic in how you wield it. Because I think it's very different when you are very conscious of what is happening in the moment. So you can determine, is this the best way of being in this moment, or do I have the potential to cause harm here or to affect someone in an adverse way in terms of how they think about these subjects. And that's very different than somebody who's just moving around and they really have a vested interest in that image that they're giving off, right?
Yeah.
And so I think just being able to see it is also really important. I would imagine is an important tweak or an important nuance to that superpower that's important to have as well.
Absolutely.
So definitely. I kind of want to be like, so what if you know my questions, what's my next question?
Let me get my notes.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So, I mean, we've touched on so much, and like, I know there are folks who are going to be listening who are just like, listen, I've heard all this before and I don't care. But there's going to be somebody listening who's like, this makes so much sense, but it's so much. How do I make sense of this? Like, how do you break it down from like, okay, the step I can do tomorrow to do better around this, or the step I can take this afternoon to be more into my my fluidity as a gendered person, or just as being me. What advice would you give for that person who's just like, baby steps, Sloan, baby steps? What's the first baby step?
Okay. Well, the first thing that I would like to acknowledge is that like time is a social construct, like, and
especially in a pandemic.
Like, I don't even know how we got here for real.
At all.
But like, I think that it's important for people to be compassionate with themselves. Like, mistakes and accidents happen in this work, and something that I've had many conversations with folks around. And mind you, this is not the biggest one, nor should it be minimized. But like, for example, when we're talking about pronouns, you know what I mean? Like people, and for people who don't know what pronouns are, those are the words we use for people's names when we're referring to someone without saying their name. I think that it's important to recognize that, like, if you make a mistake, acknowledge it, but not make the mistake about you. We're trying to make a better world. Like, we're not trying to like fill ourselves with guilt and shame over the fact that like stuff that we were taught like was harmful to everyone. Like, this is oppressive to everyone. Like, the more that you're conscious of it, the lighter the load is on even you know what I mean? So I think that going into this work, like, knowing that like the more you care about it and the more that you give yourself grace, like, the easier this will be. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Sexuality is not about like following a particular set of rules. Like, it's about like allowing liberation to exist. And I read an article recently that was like, power is not the same as being free. And I think that like the idea of freedom as the ultimate goal over like power is going to like shift the conversation in such a better direction. So I think that, we have a lot to tackle. We have the patriarchy to tackle. We have racism to tackle. We have transphobia, homophobia to tackle. Like, let the people who know what they're doing do that. You know what I mean? Like, there are educators who have been trained to do that, like, don't feel like you have to be a social justice warrior and come in and fight and advocate. If you are a white person and you have the ability and the bandwidth to like be an accomplice and step up, go ahead, use that, do what you gotta do. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely. But like, if you are someone who like is tired and what you need is rest, please rest. Like, if you are someone who needs pleasure and who needs a good back massage and who needs to just moisturize when you get out of the shower, do that. Like, it looks different for everybody. And I think that that's another thing that I like to bring into the classroom. When I'm talking about sexuality, it's like nobody gets off on all the same things. So I think like curating your own rituals around what this work looks like is going to be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. There is one thing that and I would love to check in with you about this if it feels resonant for you. The other thing that's popping up in my head is kind of a counterbalance that, yes, if you quote unquote mess up, right? Not to make it about you, and also to not use it as an excuse to not keep going. Right? Like, I think about folks who are like, well, see, I can't get it, so I don't even want to try. And it's like, no, we always have the responsibility, in my mind, to show up and contend with our privilege as it shows up and the ways that that can be harming other people. And no, it doesn't mean that we exhaust ourselves trying to be hyper vigilant about pointing it out everywhere. But it also means that we don't go to the other side and it's just like, well, yeah, privilege is just what it is. So, sorry, it is what it is.
Right.
So I think about that. I'm thinking about that as well.
Absolutely. I heard a quote somewhere on a different podcast that said, if you were born before either 1976 or 79, 6 and 9, we know them, that it's more difficult for you neurobiologically to integrate they, them as a singular pronoun. But like anybody after that, I'm not about to give like any type of credence to, because we do use they, them as a singular pronoun all the time. Did the male person come? What did they drop off? You know what I'm talking about. Where's the doctor? When are they coming? You know what I mean? Like people can be referred to without using she, her, or he, him pronouns. I just think that it's important for us to get into a practice so that your tongue gets used to it,
That's it.
That's all.
Yep. I agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So my rapid fire questions are coming up in a bit. But before we do that, share with the people, if you will, Sloan, thinking about, especially with the pandemic, with a lot of different things, just this moment in time where there's all of this different change that's going on. We didn't get into the fact that you and I are fellow Libras, so I know you follow the astrology. Yes. And I know you know all the things that are the changes that are happening in society with that. Just thinking about this, how do you see your role and or significance in the sex ed profession now, in terms of especially in light of the unique position that you hold in it?
Oh, yes. Okay. So currently I am the training and prevention coordinator at MISSY, which stands for Motivating, Inspiring, Serving, and Supporting Sexually Exploited Youth. And my role there is going to be working with the school district of Oakland to provide some workshops, prevention for human trafficking awareness, and making sure that the epidemic, like this is a serious issue, of making sure that our youth are being adequately supported, and prevention workshops are being done to make sure that they are staying safe and not being exploited by predators. So this work has been especially resonant for me and interesting because of my own background in the foster care system. There are a very large number of exploited youth who go through the foster care system. I'm learning in my training right now that the same way that the school to prison pipeline is, there is a foster care to, CSEC pipeline. CSEC stands for commercially sexually exploited children. The way that this can show up looks like, when a young person is taken from a home at late hours of the night, they get transported. They don't necessarily have any autonomy. There's very transactional experiences where they feel like, people are being paid to take care of them versus people are being paid for, taking advantage of their bodies. And I think that, seeing some of those parallels has helped me to do a lot of my own inner child work. While also recognizing that this is a population that I am here to serve. Like this is divine timing. Like I came to Oakland for a reason. And I think that like, I'm really, really looking forward to like being able to make a difference here, while also recognizing that like, it's not my job to rescue. It's my job to support, and recognizing that the central trauma roles in between young people are going to differ, because when you're an adolescent, that's the oldest that you've ever been. You know what I mean? And you think that you know everything. And like, we've all been there. We have all been young people who don't know what we're going to learn later. So I think, I just think that's the best way for me to put it, and I want the lessons that they learn to be holistic. I want them to be wholesome. I want them to be encouraging. I want them to be, pleasurable. And I think that, I'm really excited about, starting with this new organization and seeing everything that's going to come out of it. If anyone has any resources or, has an interest in reaching out to me, you can find me at sloan@missy.org.
Yes, and we'll definitely have all that information in the show notes so people can check it out. I still kind of bring my academic hat to this, so I try as much as possible to have a reference page at the end. So we will definitely have this information here for folks to check out. And I just want to say, as much as I know about you, I mean, I get that we've not been connected for a long time, but given what I know about you, if there's anybody that I could imagine doing this work, it would be you. So I'm super excited for how you're going to impact that organization, and by extension, how it's going to help you evolve into the leader that I know you are in this work. So
we're doing it. We're already doing it. Oh, and this is the thing. This is what we were talking about earlier in this book that I am reading right now, Black Girlhood Studies Collection by Aria S. Holiday. Leadership starts so early for young Black girls and femmes that people are not prepared. Like, society is not prepared. They don't know how to handle it. And I think that what needs to be affirmed is that Black women and Black femmes, they know what they're talking about. They don't need to be doubted. They don't need to doubt themselves. They need to be supported. They need to be resourced. They need to be networked. They need to get what they need in order to change the world, because that's what they're doing, regardless. They just need the credit. Put my name in the credits, please.
Yes, and they need to be loved in the process.
Absolutely.
Even the folks who value us, it's like, no, that ain't the same. That knowing what I'm worth and exploiting it to the full is not the same as I love you, I care about you, even while I know your worth. Yeah, that's important. Okay, you ready for the rapid fire question?
Let's go.
Okay, yes. I'm like, at some point I might have to change these up once people get into them, but I just love knowing what people's answers are. So at this point, I'm like, if you've thought about it, it's fine. It's okay. It's not hitting you kind of out of nowhere, but these are sentence stems. So just whatever first thing comes to your mind as soon as you hear it. Okay. So the first one is sexiness is
chocolate.
Come on.
I love me some chocolate.
Facts in all forms. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm having my own moment. Don't mind me. Look, what you said at the beginning, the pandemic has caused some challenges.
The pandemic has been so hard.
It makes it so difficult. I get so distracted during the week. Lord, I need to release. All right, never mind. Okay. Next one. The sexiest thing about Blackness and or Black people is?
I'm going to say culture. The culture, because it's the creativity, it's like you take something away, I'm gonna just make something else. Like we can't be stopped.
Yeah,
we're unstoppable.
I just said it today. I don't know if you saw my Facebook post today, but I was like, if you ever doubted that African American vernacular English exists, ask a Black American right now about how they feel about their STEMI and see what you get. Because I was like, only us would come up with something called a STEMI. Like we just change. Like we're not gonna call it what you told us it
right.
is. We're gonna twist it and give it our own spin, put our own little flavor on it.
And did you see they just added dictionary.com just added a bunch of African American vernacular words to
Did
their.
they?
Yup, finna is in there. A couple of other ones, but I'm just like, okay, we'll see. We'll see.
There's
how
so
this
many
affects
things.
This.
Like I'm surprised. I wonder if mic drop is in there because I was thinking about that too with coming to America and how most folks don't know that that's where that came from. Dropping the mic, but
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
You don't know that?
You know, I'm a little.
Sexual chocolate.
I'm from a different generation.
Chocolate. Did you see? Okay, wait. Okay, wait, because
Coming to America. What year did Coming to America come out? That was like what?
Oh, right. You were a whole baby.
I was. I'm a 92 baby.
Oh my, yes.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, fair. Because it came out in 1988. So
right.
Yeah.
So like.
Okay.
That was before I was born.
Well, I'm going to because I'm a firm believer that we need to be training up our children in the ways that they should go. So all young Black folks should know that. Well, honestly, young Black folks should know that anything that you like in our culture or like in American culture came from us. That needs to be established. But no, the mic drop is actually from a scene in Coming to America.
Wow.
Are you familiar with Randy Watson at all?
No.
Okay, so your assignment is to watch Coming to America, not the second one that just came out, but the first one.
I've seen the movie before, you know.
Oh, you just don't remember it.
I just don't know. I just, like it's just not. It's
and
just
it don't hit the same.
It's not going to, you know. Like I'm a land before time kid, you know. Like
that's fair. That's fair. I understand that. Meanwhile, I am so firmly in the cult of Coming to America, like. Yeah, I was going to say my Finsta, but then people are going to try to follow me. Next sentence prompt. My go-to for feeling sexy is...
My go-to for feeling sexy is selfies. I love taking pictures of myself. It is a pastime. I love that.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I've just recently this year gotten into taking selfies again because I think the pandemic really did, like quarantining really took me off that because I hadn't washed my locks, updated my locks in 8 weeks. You know, it had been a long time and I'm like, I don't want to take no pictures. But I did my hair for Valentine's Day and then I was like, wait a minute. Hold on, let me bring some.
Who this? New hair, who this?
It's like you forget, oh wait, there's a little something under there once I polish that coal and make that diamond.
Exactly.
All right. Sexual freedom for Black folk is achieved when?
When we have no shame. Mm-hmm. Shame is the self-deprecation and shame are my two biggest things I hate. So just making sure that people don't feel bad about themselves. Do your thing. I want people to feel like they can do stuff whether somebody is watching them, if that's what they're into, or nobody's watching them, if that's what they don't.
Yeah. I love that. Absolutely. Last but not least, when I'm done being on this podcast, I'm gonna
take a walk. You know, I'm hungry. Let's see.
Yes.
Let's see what food appears in my path.
Yes, food is always the answer. I love that. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you so much for being on T.S.O.B. with me, Sloan. This has been a phenomenal conversation.
I agree. I laughed so much. Thank you.
That's the goal. I love this so much. Just being able to have these conversations. Tell the people, you gave them your email address for your work with Missy. Tell them any social media you want to share that they can find you at if they want to just keep up with what you're doing or anything like that.
Sure. So my personal Instagram is Sloan5678. I also have a account called I'm Fucking Happy with some tips for self-care and sex specialties. And then for the young people, if anybody's interested in that, I've got Sex Ed with Sloan. So that's all on Instagram. I also have a website. If people need to reach out, contact me that way. NefertariSloan.com. NefertariSloan.com. gmail.com.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so I know you do have this job. Are you still available for hire for consulting and those sorts of things?
It depends on the type of work. Depends on the type of work. So just reach out, like I might just be in a giving mood, honestly. So,
Maybe.
Depending on what color you are. So,
right, look.
Because sometimes it's reparations. And I don't have,
Absolutely.
I don't have time to be doing, additional labor,
Fair.
but if I'm helping members of my community, it hit different.
That's facts. That's facts. Okay. Well, thank you all for listening so much. I am so excited. Hopefully you all will, I know I got nuggets. So you got nuggets, chew on them. If you have other questions or ideas, just go ahead and email the show. But with that, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time and take care. You've been listening to T.S.O.B. with Dr. G, produced by Dr. Tracy Q. Gilbert of Tembe and Aya. To keep up with all things T.S.O.B., follow us on social media at T.S.O.B. the podcast, which you can find on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. For past episodes of the show, visit tsobpodcast.com or subscribe to the show either on YouTube or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Now, don't forget that you've got homework for this episode. To find the downloadable worksheet for this or any other episode of the show, head on over again to tsobpodcast.com, where you'll find it and any other important information from the show notes. And finally, do you have any questions or thoughts to share? Sound off by email at mailbox@tsobpodcast.com. Again, this was T.S.O.B., the sex ed of Black folk. Thank you for listening. Talk again soon.